Hello, I'm Susie Smith from the ABC's True Crime Project. Over the next 2 weeks, Australian Story and the Unvravel podcast series will be exploring the mysterious death of Gomeroi teenager Mark Haines. When Mark's body was found on train tracks near Tamworth 30 years ago, police were quick to dismiss any notion of foul play. Journalist Alan Clark has been investigating the case for 5 years, and in the last few months, we've discovered startling new evidence to suggest that Mark's death is more than a mere misadventure.
I started work at West Tamworth Station at 11 o'clock, and my shift went through till 7 o'clock in the morning. My duties included making sure trains got through safely. The passenger train went through at 5:50 in the morning going through to Armidale. And then about 6:05...
909 receiving over.
I got a call from the driver on the freight train to say that he had passed over a body. I thought to myself, well, I better go out just in case the person is still alive.
Glenn was actually the first person to see Mark's body up close. He felt like there was some really strange things about what he was seeing. He immediately thought that the head wound on Mark did not look like it had been caused by a train.
It was a massive head injury, just on the hairline, and it was like a crushed eggshell, that's probably a way of putting it. Normally, if it's struck by a train, it really does make a mess of you. There was no tissue, there was no matter, there was no hair scattered anywhere. There just wasn't enough blood.
Glenn noticed a towel underneath Mark's head.
The towel was sort of folded in half and in half again. I thought it was just very unusual, very strange that the person would be on the track with a towel under his head.
Glenn was actually an investigator for the railways, and so he's seen every imaginable impact a train could make on a human body. He point blank says, "I have never seen an injury like that on Mark's caused by a train, not once."
It's been something that's stuck in my head for many years. I feel that he was put there by someone whilst he was dead, to try and make it look like he had committed suicide.
For the past 5 years, I've been on my own looking at Mark's case. And it all started when I was sent to Tamworth as a news reporter to cover an appeal to the public. I knew that the family were calling out for any information, and they felt the police weren't listening to them, and they believed it was because they were Aboriginal. One of their main concerns was, in the beginning, that Mark's death wasn't treated as suspicious, but they have always claimed it was murder.
The police, their initial views were this was a cold case. We'll piss it off sooner or later. You know, family will die, it'll all go away. Hard to find witnesses, this will all just disappear. Well, it hasn't.
And then I met up with Duck, and I guess the story starts there. Duck is Mark's uncle, and he was very, very close to Mark. Duck had just been waiting for so long for someone to listen to his questions regarding the death.
It was the first time I was able to get someone to take an interest in something that me and my family believed was terribly amiss. We have said, look, this is right out of character for our boy.
This is Mark, obviously.
Yeah.
When was that taken?
Well, I dare say that would have been taken 87 at Sister Barb and Arnie's house on Worrell Road.
This story just really hit a chord with me. I think the similarities to Mark and his family and my family, and the Gomeroi connection. We're both Gomeroi people. And I'm related to Duck's wife.
He shared the bedroom with my two eldest sons. He slept on the top bunk, and it was like, well, you know, one of my own children were taken away. Alan can understand where we're coming from, what we're going through, and he was able to empathise with us.
After that first meeting with Duck, I had so many documents. In fact, it was really overwhelming. I think the reason why I got hooked was a few things. I like a good story. I'm an Aboriginal boy. I grew up in a small community, just like Mark. Some part of me wanted to see it through and get justice for them, because everyone that had come and gone before me had not seen it through. All of them had kind of tapered off and forgotten about Mark. Everyone I speak to has such fond memories of Mark. He was incredibly popular. He was very good at school.
He was good at cricket. He was really good at basketball. I think he would have been good at anything he turned his hand to.
We were close. I always stuck with my cuz. Always went, you know, everywhere with him. He was just a happy-go-lucky guy, lovely teeth, always smiling and enjoying himself all the time. He just liked his friends like Jason Wan, Glenn Mannion.
I never saw Mark have an enemy. His personality was so gregarious and so outgoing that people just had no choice but to be friends with him.
Yeah, he had this here way of talking. He had this like a slow drawl. Remind me a bit about John Wayne. He had this slow drawl. Oh, Uncle Duck, you know.
Speaking with his best friend Jason Wan, he told me that he actually named him Stoney because when he spoke, he sounded like he was stoned because he had this low, gravelly drawl and he was quite softly spoken. Most regional cities and towns are often divided down racial lines. And in Tamworth, it's physically divided by a train track. On one side, you had the white community. On the other side, you had the Aboriginal community, which was Coaldale. Coaldale was known as Vegemite Village.
We were proud of it, though. We were proud of where we came from. We used to call ourselves the Veggie Vandals. And we weren't vandals, but it was a cool thing to say.
Mark was dating a girl named Tanya White. She was a really popular local girl, a white girl. Mark was one of a kind in the fact that he could move between the two worlds here in Tamworth. the white and the black communities. And it's not everyone that could have done that. In January 1988, it was a typical summer for kids in the country. It was blisteringly hot. And Mark was like every other teenager on school holidays. What I've pieced together about Mark's last movements all come from his friends and family's police statements, plus testimony they gave at the coronial inquest into his death. Mark, he left his house with his cousin Liam. She was older, and her partner Raymond was going to give Mark an ID so he could get into clubs because he was only 17.
He was happy. He was in a good mood. He was just wanting to get over town, you know, to go out and catch up with probably Tanya and all the boys.
I believe that Mark was at Domino's nightclub that night.
Mark and Tanya then leave sometime after midnight with another couple. They say goodbye to their mates and then they head to East Tamworth. Then they get to the corner of Wilbertree and Edward Street, which is only a few houses from where Tanya is living. Tanya told the coronial inquest later that she said goodbye to Mark around 3:30 a.m. and watched him jog up Wilbertree Street in the direction of West Tamworth where he lived. After that, she went home. Around the same time that Mark was saying goodbye to Tanya, a witness who actually told the coronial inquest about this says she was woken up by loud noises.
I could hear two voices distinctly really arguing, and I thought they were two males.
She heard a really distressed young man, that's her words.
Like he was at the end of his tether and he was going, "Leave me alone, F off." Like I thought someone was hurting him.
She tries to go back to bed and then she hears a car come flying up the street.
Seemed to just stop, screeched on the brakes and stopped. Then it took off very, very quickly.
There's a lot of speculation that whoever was in that car picked up Mark or maybe even forced him to get in. No one knows exactly what happened between Tanya saying goodbye to Mark and the train driver finding him around 3 hours later, and that's been the big mystery ever since.
We were just stunned that, you know, this could have occurred. I couldn't believe it was him. I had to go to the morgue myself and have a look at him myself.
I felt that I was responsible for him and what happened to him.
Yeah.
I was at home with Mum and the police come knocking on the door. And then Mum just started crying and I started crying and at the front door. So sad.
I knew straight away that something adverse had happened to him. I knew that something, you know, horrible had happened. I mean, he would not walk out there and lay down on railway tracks.
The next day we went straight out to the site and just tried to work out what had happened.
They were wanting to get out there and find some answers, find some clues. They're strong fellas, my uncles.
What we found sort of stunned me at first.
Generally what you see nowadays is that police mark spots where people die with pain or whatever. There was none of that.
When Mark was found, his body was lying between the rails, so it wasn't across them, it was between them, and his head was on a towel. That towel was folded and looked like it had been placed under Mark's head. We know that there was very little blood out there. In fact, reports say there was just a spot about the size of a 50-cent coin. And that's strange because Mark had a massive head injury and he also had a really big gash on his thigh. And that was noted by Glenn Bryant.
The gash was quite wide and he had torn his jeans. There was no blood at the scene, so I would assume that he sustained the injury after his heart had stopped pumping.
In the beginning, Mark's family have absolute faith that the police will do their job. And in fact, when they go out to the train tracks, they don't want to taint potential evidence, so they keep going and they look around. The brothers start to find all these other anomalies and they have a lot more questions.
We found remnants of cardboard boxes and wrapping paper, a black comb and a pink lighter. And when I finally spoke with Tanya a week later, I said, Tanya, Mark had a comb. She said, yeah, he probably would have had a comb. I said, and a pink cigarette lighter? She said, no way, Mark wouldn't have a pink cigarette lighter. Those were her words.
A few weeks after Mark's death, the family feel like the police haven't done a very thorough job at all. So they go out there and they collect what they think is potential evidence.
Myself and my brothers went into the police station. As we handed over the pink lighter and the black comb, the police reacted by saying, we thought we placed these in the evidence bag.
The train crew pointed out to the police that there was a car crash nearby, and they didn't think that was very important at the time. The family went to this Tirana, looked inside it.
At the time, we really didn't associate too much that the car was so linked. Obviously, it had rolled. The windscreen was out on the ground. It was wet.
It was a laminated windscreen. It had a lot of cracks in it. We was going to get it ourselves and put it in storage and get it fingerprinted later down the track. We went back out the next day and it was gone.
And I remember the following couple of weeks that Duck was really, really persistent and angry in regards to that car. He firmly believed that car had something to do with Mark's death, and I think he felt that the police at the time weren't taking him seriously.
This vehicle was not secured, the boot was never opened, the police never opened it. We prized it open and took the tyre and the mat out that looks like they had blood stained on.
And we took that to the police station, and I said to him, I think this is blood on here. He said, it could be animal blood.
The car was left exposed to the elements. The police didn't even bother to fingerprint it, and their excuse was it would have been too wet to actually lift a print. They told the family, they told other people that Mark may have stolen the car.
And drove it out here, crashed it, walked across that railway line in the pouring rain, carrying presents, and he turned around and lied down.
With his head on a towel. such a bizarre scenario.
No, that was their story, you know what I mean? But it wasn't our story. It was foul play, and it was a cover-up, right from the word go. But where they went wrong, he couldn't drive a car.
There is not a chance that he could drive a manual car. I mean, not even under instruction. He just didn't have it. He didn't have it. He didn't have the basic skills.
The uncles also went and retraced Mark's steps to see if he could get from that car to where his body was. And there's a rail bridge in the middle, and at the time there was no safety barrier. So it's a very steep drop between big holes in this rail bridge. To walk over that would have been almost impossible at night without falling. They tried to walk across it in broad daylight and they couldn't do it.
I'll never forget what Duck said to me. He said, "I won't give up. I'll never give up as long as I live. I will find out what happened to my boy." He wanted justice, and he never believed the official story.
The explanation from the police about this young man's death never held water. Even the most cursory scrutiny would have said that it was a farcical explanation. You couldn't describe this investigation as anything other than racially biased when it went off. There is no conceivable way that if this was a young white person, that the investigation would have ended in the dead end it did.
Case closed. They didn't want to do the paperwork. He was a young Aboriginal boy, that was it. Out for a joyride, that's him.
Mark gets buried at the end of January, and the uncles are absolutely desperate for answers. Duck, he promised Mark's parents that he would see justice for them. Unfortunately, they passed away a few years ago, and so they never got to see any of that justice.
Well, the police, they must have got sick of me and Duck going up to the police station. They more or less said, just go out and do your own investigation. Just see what you can find out. They'll talk to you. They won't talk to us.
And then halfway through the year, they find out that Mark might have been killed because he was planning to steal some marijuana crops, and that it was a warning or an assault gone wrong by some standover men in the town. And to cover it up, Mark was put on the train tracks.
There was a lot of crops around Tamworth at that time, from what I hear. Back then, it was quite openly grown. There were some heavy dudes around at the time. I mean, big muscles, tattoos, you know, beards, all that kind of stuff, getting around on Harleys.
About 400 plants were found in the plantation, many measuring almost 3 metres in height.
How big was the drug racket in Tamworth at the time?
Oh, you're talking millions. Back then, millions, $1 million was a lot of money.
If someone was going to steal some marijuana from a plantation, what would the retribution be?
Oh, well, you kill them, you get them out of the way, silence them.
And had you known of cases like that?
Yeah, yeah.
How many would you say?
Probably 3 or 4. People just disappear.
This world is very violent and very sinister. The family are trying to figure out how Mark, who'd never been in trouble with the law in his life, smoked marijuana occasionally, got caught up in all of this.
As far as I know and gathered, he smoked occasionally. Yeah. That was his business, you know. He was 17 and like a lot of other young kids, you know, they all smoked.
I mean, he wasn't hiding away in a room somewhere, you know, being a chronic pothead. That didn't affect his life at all.
Well, then the story started coming out that he knew about a drug crop which was up in Nundle, and he was supposedly organising a couple of people to go and raid it. That was what I've heard, and so therefore he was kept quiet. Well, I thought it was a joke because it was just right out of character. And he wasn't a thief anyway. He was an honest kid.
Everybody says no way could Mark have been connected to the drug trade. There was no way that he was a drug dealer. There was no way he was involved in any of that murky underbelly. It's a pretty bizarre world the brothers find themselves in. They're deep in grief, but at the same time, they're smack bang in the middle of this DIY investigation, and they feel like they're actually getting more clues than the police at this point. And on top of that, the rumours in town are going wild. And then a name emerges. And when the uncles go and confront this person, all hell breaks loose.
What they believe is that Mark was not alone on the night that he died.
They believed that there was foul play with Mark Haines and that my son was involved in some way. There was a suicide note, but no reason for why. I think I'm coming close to my answer.
He said, did you know why he killed himself? And I said, no, I didn't. Why? And he went on to tell me that Terry was the last one left and he couldn't deal with it. And he said, well, he was in that car that night.
It was getting a little bit too hot out there. We hit a nerve, and that's why they wanted this meeting, to try and tell us to back off. You know, duck, even back off.
He hasn't given up. 30 years later. I just wish he'd get his answers. I just want him to have peace. I want Mark to have peace.
Did you kill Mark Haines?
I didn't kill Mark Haines. I didn't do him any harm. I didn't know him.